Hindus would say, in their diagnosis, all religions will accept that something ails humanity. Like they will all accept that. They will accept that much, that something somehow or other human beings aren't happy. But in their diagnosis of what it is ails us, they differ pretty radically. Christianity will sometimes say that if a superficial view of the Christian story is that it was all an act of rebellion, that we were born for paradise and we lived in paradise. Then our first parents rebelled. It was as if there was a sign saying, don't walk on the grass. And Adam and Eve walked on the grass, and the whole of nature, everything under the seventh heaven in some sense, or everything under the heavens collapsed, fell. So the whole of nature now became fallen nature. So they would locate the cause for what ails us in an act of rebellion. Now, in the East, their diagnosis is radically different, because in the East, they wouldn't so much say that I am a rebellious sinner, and that's what ails me. They would say that I eclipse ultimate reality. And I don't just eclipse it with far from my mind being the window. My mind is, in fact, the blind. And all states of mind, whether they be states of dreaming mind or states of waking mind, whether they be states of psyche or whatever the states are, they eclipse ultimate reality. So when I talked about, in the first little Sufi parable, talked about the person walking beyond the housekeeper, the house owner, walking beyond the narrow circle of sensory intellectual light. Maybe in some sense that we have to accept the Hindu diagnosis, that dreaming awareness is eclipsed, that waking awareness is eclipsed. And far from waking up from waking being a calamity, it is in fact the immense opportunity. That when in the Good Friday experience we hear about the veil in the temple was rent, don't we? Now, supposing that an external event happened, an external veil in an external temple was rent, but supposing we have to now accept with the Hindus that the veil of my psyche, conscious and unconscious, that too was rent. And I walked through the Red Sea of my psyche into the great wilderness. But the wilderness that I walk into is a divine wilderness. I'm now undergoing what St. John of the Cross called the process of the dark night of the soul. You know, I've now gone into the wayless way. I've left all ways behind, ways of waking and ways of dreaming. I mean, Jung and Freud and these people now, when they talk about healing people, psychoanalysts, when they talk about healing, basically what they say is that there's a disjunction there's a Berlin Wall, or there is a repressing mechanism between consciousness and unconsciousness. And what we do is, in some sense, break down that Berlin Wall or that repressing mechanism, and we put consciousness and unconsciousness in touch with each other. So we integrate all our repressions. We let them emerge into consciousness, so that where id is, ego shall be. This would be a classical Freudian sense of where healing will come from. Now, I think with Hindus we will say, and there is healing of the psyche. A Hindu, I think, would say to us, that is healing of the psyche. But healing of the psyche isn't final healing. Final healing is healing from the psyche. Because psyche, conscious and unconscious, is blind, not the window. Psyche, conscious and unconscious, is eclipse. Now, a Hindu diagnosis of what ails me would say that I eclipse divine ground. I don't just eclipse it with darkness in me. I eclipse it with the light of my mind. It isn't with the dark of my mind that I eclipse it. I eclipse it with the dark of my mind. Where I live now in Connemara, in Letterdive House, I'm sitting in my living room, and sometimes if I want to go in and make a cup of tea or have a cup of water, whatever it is, I'll come into the kitchen, and I have to cross the kitchen because the light switches are on the far door. And as I'm crossing the kitchen, I look through the big picture window, and if it's a moonlight night, I look out and I see the sea. And I can see Canrammer there, and I can see away to the coast of Carna, or down that way. I can see the outside world. As I cross the dark kitchen, the moment I switch on the light, suddenly the light eclipses the outside. I can now see what's in the inside, but I've eclipsed the outside. And having had the cup of tea, I then switch off the light again, and now I can't see what's in the inside, but I can again see what's in the outside. So the very light that I switch on eclipses portions of reality. So when St. John of the Cross talks about
the dark night of the soul, I think it wouldn't be unfair to him to say, it wouldn't be unfair to his intentions to say that we must go beyond psyche, all the lights of our faculties. He talks about, on this dark road, to have your senses covered in darkness is to see the light. So he talks about nada, 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 Ian al monte nada. So this diagnosis of what ails me, I am an eclipse. And the tragic thing is, I am a junkie to the eclipse that I am. You know, I continue to want to experience myself psychically. So I'm addicted to the eclipse that I am. And the very psyche with which I would seek divine ground eclipses divine ground. The very means that I would use, that thinking that these means will help me to come home to divine ground, they eclipse it. It is with the eclipse, it is with that in me which eclipses divine ground that I seek divine ground, and that is the tragedy. And a time comes when you enter the dark night when you have to literally say, I have to be carried home. You have to become plankton in an abyss of faith. Now, knowing where we are in terms of my whereabouts, I mean, in the dream I was cocksure that I was in Isfahan, south of Isfahan, and there on the side of the road telling Martin Hollidan that I knew where I was. You know, and Martin says to me, should I know well where we are now, John, having listened to you in terms of my whereabouts, but where the fuck are we? Now, I could ask a scientist, you know, in the modern world, after they have spent 3 centuries looking down microscopes and looking down telescopes and seeing galaxies and beyond galaxies and mega galaxies, and they're talking about light years and hundreds of millions of light years. And I could ask an astrophysicist like Carl Sagan, I'd say to Carl, God bless you now, you've been looking at the universe for 3 centuries now in your white coats, and can you tell us where are we? And Carl would say, well, it's a universe of galaxies, and there are black holes in it, and we belong in a mega galaxy, and our galaxy is called the Milky Way, and our galaxy is a spiral galaxy, and on the outer arm of that it's composed of 100 million stars, and on the outer arm of that there is a star that we call and know as the Sun. That star has 9 or 10 or 12 planets around it. Our planet is the 5th planet out, and it's called Earth, and that's where we are. And I want to say to Carol, oh, Carol, having listened to you now, having listened to you as an astrophysicist, having listened to you now telling me where I am, should I know well where I am now, Carol? I know well where I am now, Carol, but where the fuck am I? Where are we all? Like, do you know what I mean? So when I talked in the story about little Amanda, about from her own tummy, I suppose, and going beyond knowing and knowing where we are in terms of our whereabouts. If we don't get the diagnosis right, I mean, we know that something ails us, but if we don't get the diagnosis right, I mean, I could be feeling very bad, you know, have a kind of flu-like condition, and I go to one doctor and he say, well, I think what you've got is candida. So he prescribes a certain kind of diet, and I follow this diet to the letter, but 5 months later, I'm no better. And I go to another doctor and he say, well, now I think 'twas that diphtheria you had when you were young, that there's a hangover of that in the body, and there's all toxins there, and that's it. So he prescribes another remedy for me, and I live with that remedy, and perfectly as he advised me to. Again, 5 months later, you know, the Lord save us, like, I still have it. And I go to another doctor and he diagnoses something else and gives me another remedy. And then finally I go to a doctor and he says, well, I've run tests, and you've got AIDS. So everyone accepted that something ails me, but they came up with 5 different diagnoses. The religions accept that something ails us, and they come up with different diagnoses. And I think like that if you look at mystical Christianity and look at mystical Hinduism and Buddhism, that they will say that, in a sense, one way of putting it is that my condition, to diagnose me, I say to an Upanishadic sage, and the Upanishadic sage will say, you are an eclipse. In the light of your mind, the very light of your faculties, of your memory and your intellect and your reason, the very light of your mind eclipses divine ground. The very faculties with which you would seek divine ground eclipse divine ground. That's the tragedy. So you have to surrender to the wayless way. You have to know that knowing where you are in terms of your whereabouts, all of that is vulnerable knowing. There is a stupendous event called waking up from dreaming. There's an equally stupendous event of waking up from waking. It is waking